Hi everyone, I'm going into the email files for the talk today, with thanks to Jason for sending in a question that came with an overview of part of his life. In my mind, that question was incisive and relevant enough that I want to answer it with a video, which Jason agreed to. So without further ado, here's the email. I'm 21, says Jason. I dated once when I was 16 and the way it ended hurt pretty badly. Naturally, I blamed myself in the end, but looking back on it, I see that while I made mistakes, she was just as guilty. It took me until now to even discover the men's human rights movement, and the more I watch, the more concerned with how cynical I've become. I'm a university student attending school for a degree in business administration with a minor in gaming entrepreneurship, with goals to go into the esports entertainment industry. I've never once considered anything other than the fact I was doing it for myself, so I'm not questioning my choices. However, there is one thing that I've become concerned about. You are right when you state in multiple videos you posted that humans are naturally inclined to pair bond. I suppose my biggest concern is that knowing female nature and knowing that society is largely to blame for allowing it to get this far, is it possible to still love a woman and accept that nature may still exist, even if she does respect your boundaries and values? I don't want to believe swearing off women forever is the answer like MGTOW suggests, but I also have a hard time buying that I'll really ever trust a woman knowing these things about how most women are. Really, the question boils down to this. Is being red-pilled synonymous with being cynical? Okay, that's the end of his email. 2 brief paragraphs that cut to the core of a very important crossroads for those just ingesting the red pill, especially those doing it in the earlier parts of their lives. Jason is 100% right about the paradox of modern relationship from a man's perspective. Most of my observations force me to conclude that we live in a culture where men and women collude to produce a female psyche that, as it stands, is nothing short of a miserably poor investment for men. That's certainly reflected in the way we laud and encourage women for showing contempt for us. If you don't believe that, think of it this way. One of the subjects we see visited and revisited in men's movement literature is that of male bashing in commercial advertising. We take issue with retailers for their treatment of men and fathers as hapless idiots who can't tie their shoes without instructions from the woman in their life. With some regularity, you still see commentary and comments about boycotts of these companies. What we don't talk about too much, perhaps because it's painful, is that advertisers are only doing what works. Stumbling, bumbling, pathetic men are a go-to option for advertisers because that is what the majority of women consumers want to see. Belittling and insulting men triggers them to buy. Not to keep flogging the dead horse, but we instill a level of assumed entitlement in women that we could reasonably use as part of the diagnostic criteria for personality disorders. We passionately encourage women to indulge in and brazenly exploit double standards that favor them as part of the natural order. We make heroines of women when they viciously use the powerful tools we put at their disposal anytime their privilege is denied. If you notice I keep saying we, it's because I mean it. None of this crap happens in a vacuum, which red pill men are well served to remember and frequently don't. The hateful way advertisers sell to women? Well, that trashing of you, your sons, your fathers, and your brothers has exactly zero impact on male spending. You can bash, demean, demonize, and derogate men all day long, and generally speaking, their response is to reach for their wallet and give you money. Like I said, we. What I'm really getting from this email is the question of whether your informed outlook on women will rob you of anything positive from the pair bonding experience. Again, depending on the man, it can feel like the bonding is with a stinging insect. This is worth exploring because, as Jason pointed out quite rightly, another bit of reality in this picture for red pill men is that most all of them will continue to pair bond. That being inarguably true, we need to answer the very legitimate question of whether taking a red pill is dooming a man to the choice between lifestyle isolation or lifestyle vulnerability to harm. And how much of a choice is that really? Isn't living in hypervigilance, constantly wary of the woman you're with, just another form of loneliness? That kind of non-choice choice is almost enough to make a man want a red pill detox. Almost. I happen to think I've figured out a path through this problem. It's a narrow, difficult path, but one that can at least nudge the problem toward the solved category. And it has a big plus. It is ultimately a huge step toward what I call red pill endgame. It reveals the incredible usefulness of red pill thinking that goes far beyond our choices about women by forcing us to walk alone through some fire about our relationships with them. I can even present you with a specific formula to make it happen. I call it how to red pill your relationship with a woman in 3 incredibly difficult, torturously painful steps. Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but you get my point. This stuff isn't easy, and depending on your personality, it may well not be worth your time. Step 1 is crucial. You must get the difference between love and romantic love. This isn't something you can intellectualize yourself into understanding. It's a big, big deal. So important you are well advised to spend a good deal of time thinking about it and challenging yourself to force your expectations to be consistent with reality. Romantic love, the kind that Western humans have been steeped in for nearly 1,000 years, is a gynocentric cancer that you've been afflicted with since your days in the womb. You don't need to be cynical to see this. You only have to have your eyes open and set in front of a functional brain. Romantic love is a narrative of male sacrifice in exchange for sex and to some degree approval. It is likely based on and driven by the state of infatuation, a naturally occurring form of psychosis that serves human reproduction. Romantic love takes the temporary insanity of gut-churning, passionately hot, and mindlessly sacrificial love and turns it into a mandate for men to maintain that in perpetuity for the benefit of a woman. On its face, it's a perfect storm of sexual selection, male sacrifice, and male disposability, which is really just 3 different ways of saying gynocentrism. It's a fairy tale, gents, a dime store romance novel that should have no more place in the thinking of sane men than the synonymous self-castration. It's the "you complete me" Jerry Maguire bullshit fantasy of love that leaves men burdened with the ongoing task of making women feel like the center of the universe. And it's the mushy, gushing soulmate narrative, the product of infatuated servile poets and women's narcissistic fantasies. It's a version of love that simply cannot be maintained, and it will devour anyone who tries. When you think about just how wacko romantic love is, it casts a funny but illuminating light on how some Westerners look condescendingly at arranged marriages. In other words, marriages between people who may not have ever met and who know next to nothing about each other. These are marriages that don't originate with the spark of infatuation. I've seen lots of Westerners talk about these marriages in mocking terms, as though they were the quaint practices of some primitive cultures that are not up to their enlightened standards. They sneer at the formation of arranged families and instead idealize marriages starting with a temporary, insane rush of neurochemicals as a more sophisticated standard. Oh yes, courtship, wooing, wining and dining women. How totally cosmopolitan. It's important to get this for any man, especially red pill men. Love and romantic love are two entirely different things. Love is a long time coming. It's a product of learned experience, negotiating conflicts and outright battles for control. It comes from enduring hardship as a team and, to some degree, developing mutual dependence. It's an arduous, often bloody affair that requires both people to share and promote interests that serve them both. And interestingly, for couples first bonded by romantic love, it requires them to grieve the loss of that which brought them together. The expectations and standards of romantic, or more accurately, gynocentric love, are a fool's errand. Trying to maintain that only breeds a toxicity of which men are the primary victims, and it commonly ends relationships in bitter disappointment. When standards are impossible, failure is certain. So, for actual love to arise, romantic love must die. Now, the point here is not to compare East and West and how they traditionally choose to pair bond, but to point out that as a Western red pill man, your programmed beliefs about pair bonding are deeply, fatally flawed. It's a mistake to think that you're exempt from this. Just because you have found great benefit in learning red pill philosophy doesn't mean you are no longer affected by the faulty beliefs. After all, ideas can change rapidly with new information. Beliefs, on the other hand, linger. They quietly and unconsciously pull strings in our thinking and behavior long after information to the contrary registers consciously. If a man thinks that women are responsible human beings capable of accountability, but he struggles to treat them that way, then it is because despite what he thinks, what he believes makes him falter when it comes to holding a woman to his standards. He hesitates long enough for the guilt associated with his real beliefs to take root and silence him. Note what Jason said in his email to me. I'm going to quote him again here. "Naturally, I blamed myself in the end," he said, "but looking back on it, I see that while I made mistakes, she was just as guilty." Naturally, I blamed myself in the end. Or, and allow me to paraphrase him slightly here, blaming myself is natural. Straight out of the Gynocentric Handbook and straight out of Jason's beliefs at that moment in his life. It's a living artifact of romantic love, powerful enough to prompt any man who really looks at it to find an escape into sexual isolation or perhaps into lifelong cynicism. And here is where I'm going to suggest that pragmatism is a lot more valuable than cynicism to a man contemplating pair bonding. The problem with romantic programming, which I'll remind you is your programming, is that infatuation, the very foundation of romantic love, is pragmatism's kryptonite. It forces an idealized picture of the woman and then creates a fiction around her that fits an unrealistic view. In other words, it has you making shit up because reality would kill the neurochemical glow created by infatuation. How many times have you heard men say, "Oh no, my cupcake would never do that," when Cupcake is broadcasting at 50,000 watts that she can't be trusted any further than you could throw her car? Most men, the lion's share, are utterly doomed to mindlessly waxing poetic about Cupcake till she moves in for the kill. They are hopelessly mired in the gynocentric fog. They won't be heard from again till archaeologists in the 30th century unearthed their mummified and completely fleeced remains. I don't think that Jason has to be one of these men, and I don't think that the isolation of a monk's life or the isolation of a cynical life will provide the solutions he's looking for. If he so chooses, Jason still has at least a shot at the only kind of love or commitment with pair bonding people ever actually experience. If he is willing to put a non-gynocentric, non-romantic view of women and relationships at the forefront of all of his efforts. If he does this consciously, diligently, and with absolute personal accountability, it's hard for him to lose. At worst, he runs off a bunch of women before he enables them to do significant harm. Good riddance. At best, he finds someone who, for however long, can provide the companionship and consistency that the allure of pair bonding promises. When companionship, consistency, and some measure of parity are the objectives, instead of the sappy fantasies of romantic love, a world of different options appear, and those options are infinitely more satisfying and healthy, if for any other reason, because they are attainable. All you have to do to start is dispense with a few hundred generations of social programming and resolve to never let yourself risk the emotional and financial gauntlet of marriage. Simple, right? Well, of course it's not simple. It's vastly complicated and difficult. No one could reasonably criticize a man who just says screw it and takes the monk's route. Thing is, as we've already established, that is not what most men are going to do. Just like everything else we approach with reason and evidence instead of ideology and pipe dreams, we don't have to like it. Not liking it does not mean it's not true. And this is just step 1. I'll be getting to steps 2 and 3 in part 2 of this series, coming up next. Until then, as always, I hope you've enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.